By the late 1800s, European powers began eyeing up the African continent to feed their imperialist ambitions. Many newer nations, such as Italy and Germany, were late to the era of colonization and felt the need to compensate with African land. This too extended to the Kingdom of Belgium. Belgium is a small nation that was birthed out of revolution and acted as a buffer state between the French Republic and the new German Empire. It was united by the Catholic faith and had a small industry sector early on. The nation, however, was in no way powerful and was seen as a pawn in the European chessboard. Such circumstances pushed the Belgian monarchy to seek its own greatness outside of the crowded continent. This began with an expedition in 1874 headed by a man named Henry Morton Stanley. With the patronage of the Belgian King Leopold, he explored the Congo River basin and negotiated treaties with the local tribes in the name of the king himself. This expedition and its treaties would lead to one of the most strange decisions in human history. You see, during the Berlin Conference that was hosted between 1884 and 1885 to carve up Africa, nobody could decide who should get the Congo. The main two opponents were the French and the Germans. Both wanted access to the wealth and the Congo River, and they were willing to fight to get it. This is where Leopold had the opportunity of a lifetime. He convinced the other great powers to give it to him personally due to his so-called extensive humanitarian and philanthropic work in the area, as well as the treaties established by Stanley, plus no tax on trade. This, coupled with the fact that it would avoid war between the Germans and the French, made the decision final, and the entire Congo River basin fell into the hands of a despot. Leopold instantly set about exploiting his new fiefdom. He organized the territory into the new Congo Free State and began multiple infrastructure projects to bring the Congo's natural wealth into European markets. The main good that the Free State was concerned with was that of rubber, which had become a necessary resource in the burgeoning industrial world. To get as much as possible, quotas were put on the local African villages to provide this rubber. If these quotas were not met, however, the Free State's army, known as the Force Publique, would commit heinous violence and massacres against the local population. Such open violence started to become widespread knowledge back in Europe. It was seen as so widespread and so evil that many of the other great powers and their peoples began to condemn Leopold, even as their nations did similar acts on a smaller scale in the rest of Africa. The pressure of the monarch's actions on the Belgian government weighed so heavily that through many years of the Free State's existence, the Belgian parliament finally pushed aside the king and annexed the Congo Free State. Afterwards, it was given an official colonial administration under the new title of the Belgian Congo on the 18th of October 1908. Following decades of extensive study, it has been found that under Leopold's Free State that between 1.2 and 13 million people were killed via direct violence or disease brought over from Europe. The range is so high due to a lack of records of killings as well as the halving of the population in many areas of the Congo. The Belgian Congo really did not change much how the Free State was run, notably keeping the Force Publique, but they did end much of the headline-breaking mass murder to avoid further scandal. With the new administration, some changes did come. One that is very interesting is that the Belgian government decided to run the colony directly from Brussels, the capital of Belgium, rather than work with the local tribes and kingdoms of the area. This allowed for the Belgians to institute a complete political ban for the Congolese and keep all reins of power in their hands. This form of rule differed greatly from the rest of sub-Saharan colonies and led to many issues during the period of independence. Skipping to World War I, Belgium was invaded by the German Empire in 1914. But in Africa, it would be the Force Publique who would invade into German East Africa and win some victories for the crown. The Allied victory also led to the Belgian annexation of Rwanda and Burundi in Africa as compensation, but they would continue to be administered separately from the Congo. In another skip to World War II, a wholly different situation took place. In 1940, Nazi Germany completely took over the Belgian heartland and forced the government into exile in the Congo. Thousands of whites also fled with the government while society continued to be completely segregated. The Force Publique would also go on to win some victories in Italian Ethiopia, and as the war came to a close, the Belgian government would return to the European continent. In post-war Africa, many peoples began pushing for the manifestation of a decolonized Africa so that Africans themselves may have their own self-determination. This did not end in the Congo, which led to many idealists forming their own organizations outside of the colonial government in order to push for a future Congolese-run Congo. The Evuyule were a social class that developed in Africa towards the end of the 1940s. They were Africans located in French and Belgian colonies who were considered Europeanized, which usually meant that they spoke French, were educated, and were Christian. This group of people would be the ones to dominate the political landscape of French Africa for many decades to come. In 1954, the Alliance de Congo, ABACO for short, was one of the many Avuyule-run organizations that wanted Congolese independence. They requested that the Belgian colonial government allow for a candidate to be chosen from a list provided by them to be in charge of the municipal government for Leopoldville, which is the modern-day capital of the DRC, now called Kinshasa. The government agreed, which led to the first time a Congolese person would run an office within the Congo. This decision, however, would immediately begin to backfire on the government. The office in Leopoldville increasingly became hostile to the rest of the colonial regime and demanded for more and more autonomy within the system. As the situation worsened, the Abaco began demanding for immediate independence. It got so bad that in December of 1957, the Belgian government allowed for municipal elections throughout the whole of the Congo. They tried to inject Belgian parties into the continent, but most Congolese voted on Congolese-created parties, mostly on ethnic and tribal lines. Soon after, in October of 1958, a new party known as the Mouvement National Congolese, MNC for short, was founded based on the idea of achieving independence through peaceful means. The Belgians therefore trusted the MNC more than the Abaco, which was shown by them allowing the MNC to attend the All Africans People's Congress in Ghana. These different views on how the Congo should achieve independence naturally pitted the MNC and the Abaco as rivals. A few years later, in 1960, the MNC decided to hold a political rally. Abaco, not to be outdone, did the same, but they did not alert the Belgian authorities of the rally until the last second. This meant that the authorities responded to the alert right before the event with the message that Abaco could only have a small private meeting instead of a rally that they had planned. This was told to them as already a massive crowd had formed to attend the rally. As they told the crowd of the decision, they began to riot as they felt that the Belgians had betrayed them by not letting them be part of the political process. The riot soon turned into a 3-day attack on Europeans and their property, and even spread to other parts of the country. This event made it clear to the Belgians that they were losing control of the country, and they soon formed the Round Table Conference with the Congolese leaders on January 11, 1960, to figure out how to deal with Congolese independence. It was soon decided that elections would be held in May and independence would be achieved in June. This promise was kept, and independence was achieved on June 30th, 1960. The MNC had a relative majority after the election, and two influential Evuile named Patrice Emery Lumumba, who would become the first prime minister, as well as Joseph Kasavubu, who would become the first president of the new Republic of the Congo. Soon after independence, the Force Publique was assembled by Lieutenant General Emile Jassens, the Belgian still in charge of the new Republic of the Congo's military. There he told his subordinates that the army would not change in any way after independence. This came as a shock to many of the lower black officers who expected that the army that had oppressed their people for so many years would finally be a force to protect them. Instead, it would continue to be dominated by a European elite who had no interest in the rapid promotion of black officers. What followed was mass mutiny. Thousands of African troops began attacking whites throughout the Congo via murder, rape, and destruction of property. The government's response, headed by Lumumba, was to reorganize the army into the Army National Congolese, ANC for short, and mass promote black officers while urging the mutiny to lay down their arms. This was sadly too little and too late, however, as the intensity of violence only continued to grow. Fears of a white genocide in Belgium prompted the government to deploy its paratroopers across the Congo to try and help white refugees fleeing the country. In this process, they battled with mutiny militias in major cities. After the operation, almost the entire white population fled the Congo, as well as many white civil servants, which partially paralyzed the already unstable republic. To make the entire situation much worse, secessionist movements spread across the country that dreamed of splitting from the chaotic Congolese catastrophe. In 1958, a party known as Confédération des Associations Tribales de Katanga, CONACAT for short, was created by ethnic Katangans within the Congo. Their leadership, headed by Moise Tshobi, decided that staying within the Republic of the Congo was madness due to the levels of instability and economic connections elsewhere, and declared secession from the rest of the Congo to form the state of Katanga in the southeast of the country. Afterwards, Tshobi declared, "We are seceding from chaos." Later, another secession occurred on the 8th of August in a small part of Kasai province, supposedly to protect the local ethnic groups from possible discrimination and violence. The head of the small breakaway state was a man named Albert Kaloji, and the state was known as South Kasai. There was, however, an underlying motive for these secessions. In both territories, Belgian mining companies had humongous facilities, and they were worried that a strong central government might try to nationalize them. The solution was to heavily fund the local movements in the area with the promise of stability and economic investment. This led to both states to be supported by Belgian paid-for mercenaries, which were there to keep the peace and fight back any government attempts to retake the land. Overall, the breakaway states held 40% of the entire Congo's revenue. As Belgian support for the secessionist movements became known, calls for Belgian withdrawal became prevalent. The United Nations, wanting to take advantage of the situation to demonstrate their peacekeeping abilities, adopted a resolution which called for the withdrawal of Belgian troops that would be replaced by a UN peacekeeping force to help stabilize the country.
Lumumba was originally in favor, as he expected the UN forces to help him defeat the separatists. This, however, was refused by the UN, who argued that they were only there to keep up the law and order and not fight directly. Lumumba, running out of options, quickly turned to the US for help, who also refused to intervene.
Frustrated, Lumumba finally came to the Soviet Union. The Soviets agreed and sent military supplies as well as 1,000 military advisors. With this new support, the Congo launched a successful military campaign against South Kasai, during which thousands of local Baluba people were murdered in massacres and ethnic violence by the ANC. The United States, soon after the Soviet-Congo agreement, became wary of the nation, even though they literally refused to help, which forced the Congo to turn to the Soviets. Fears of the Congo falling to communism became rampant in America, with the CIA pushing the narrative for possible intervention. Within the Congo itself, the Soviet agreement caused a split between Lumumba and Joseph Kasavubu, as Kasavubu feared greater Western intervention and that Lumumba was pushing for centralization too hard. On September 5, 1960, under pressure, Lumumba was dismissed by Kasavubu. Both chambers of government, however, refused this, and to avoid crisis, a man named Mobutu Sese Seko, now the leader of the ANC, conducted a bloodless coup. He decided to side with Kasavubu and put Lumumba under house arrest and sent away the Soviet advisors. He followed by reinstating Kasavubu as president for the time being. Lumumba would later escape his house arrest, but would eventually be caught, tortured, and eventually executed inside of Katanga. In the following years, the UN would have many embarrassments at the hands of Katanga and Belgian-backed mercenaries. This eventually led to Resolution 169 in November 1961 that rejected Katangan statehood and ordered the UN forces to help finish off Katanga and bring it back into the central Congolese government. Tshombe would be forced into surrender on January 17, 1963, but he was allowed to be reintegrated into the republic's government. Due to the disenchantment and chaos of Congolese independence, many rural Congolese began to look for new options for a second independence. This culminated in the Maoist-inspired Pierre Mulele, who worked with the rural people of eastern Congo to launch the Simba Rebellion on the 16th of January 1964. They were loosely communist and advanced rapidly through the eastern Congo. They also conducted massacres against westernized Congolese, but left most white people alone, at least early on. The rebellion was supported by the Soviet Union and China and became the People's Republic of the Congo. After nearly losing half the country to the Simba Rebellion, the ANC started to push them back, with the help of many former Katangan mercenaries who were supplied by the CIA. Belgian paratroopers also intervened to fight the People's Republic, which led to the Simba Rebellion being mostly put down by October 1965. Soon after 1965, the government came to a standstill between Kasavubu and Tshombe-led factions. To halt the paralysis, Mobutu launched a second bloodless coup on the 25th of November 1965. This time, however, a new age would be born, and he would not be giving up his newfound power. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the second part in the Kivu series, and then the next episode will be going over the Congo Wars. I hope to see you guys there, and have a good day, y'all.